It's estimated that around about 30% of children will experience sexual abuse. 10% of those of the most serious kind. 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 8 boys will experience some form of sexual abuse before the age of 16 years. And I acknowledge, by figures, that must mean that some of you listening may have experienced. And this is why it's such a difficult topic to discuss, because it is so emotional for people. But I believe we must speak. We must speak more openly, particularly about how we treat people who have sexual attraction to children. Because the better we understand that group, the better we can treat, and the less harm will be caused to children in future. Let me run a scenario for you, one that I've seen in my practice as a forensic psychologist regularly. You have a son. His name's David. He's 19 years old. He lives at home. He's a smart, sensitive, kind, loving boy. Smart, studying at university. I won't say what. He likes online gaming. Never had a lot of friends. Never had a girlfriend. That's okay. You're a late bloomer as well. He'll find his way. One day when you're cleaning his room, you find a catalogue on the floor. It's open to a page which depicts children in underwear and swimwear. You don't think too much of it at the time. About a week later, you walk into his room without knocking. Never do that, by the way. He's masturbating. It looks like he's holding the catalogue which you saw the week before. You're horrified, shocked. This is terrible. You confront him later, and it pours out of him, the shame, the guilt that he's attracted sexually to children between the ages of 6 and 12 years. What do you do as a parent? How do you help your son that you love, that you raised? It seemed like only yesterday he was in kindergarten, and now this. How do you help him? What can you do? It may surprise you to know that at this stage, David meets the criteria for pedophilia. Pedophilia is a sexual attraction towards children under the age of 13 years. It's not necessary that somebody would have contact with a child in a sexual way to be diagnosed with pedophilia. David hasn't yet touched a child, hasn't at this stage downloaded any child exploitation material. And yet, he can be described as a pedophile. Over the course of my career, I've seen the worst kinds of perpetrators of sexual abuse. And what I think is important to understand is that sexual abuse of children exists on a spectrum, and it overlaps with pedophilia. At the most extreme end, we have callous perpetrators of the most serious, callous sexual abuse of children. Some of them can't be described as pedophiles because they will sexually abuse children, adolescents, adults. They just don't care. And these people need to be kept away from society. But there are other groups within that we need to understand better and treat. There's a group of people who are sexually attracted to children who will engage in sexual contact with children. There's a group of people who are sexually attracted to children who will never engage sexually with a child in real life, but will download child exploitation material. And yet there's another group of people who are sexually attracted to children, but would never go on to either download or anything or have contact with a child. And David is in this last category. David's at the lower end. And it might surprise you to know that there are more people at this lower end than there are at the more extreme end, and yet we don't have the treatment services to provide to these people to stop them from going on to offend against children. So here's an idea. What if we had treatment services to intervene early, to stop people from progressing up the chain? That would be a good idea. There is not one set course for people who are sexually attracted to children. Some people like David may stay where they are. They may acknowledge their sexual attraction. They may never act on it by downloading any child exploitation material or going on to a contact sex offence. Unfortunately, and I think for someone like David, it's quite likely, given his low social contacts and he's never had a girlfriend, it's quite likely that he's going to progress from where he is to downloading child exploitation material. Whether he goes on to a contact sex offence is up in the air. That's not a definite course, but it certainly can happen. So at this stage, early on, We don't know where David's going to go. And the trouble I've seen in the course of my career so far is that at this stage, I only get to see people for treatment or assessment after they've offended, after they've downloaded child exploitation material, after they've had contact with a child. It's too late. We haven't intervened early enough. And a number of those people feel such shame and guilt and acknowledge the wrongfulness of their actions, but they have nowhere to turn. They don't know where to go. The terminology we need to use, you may have heard me using it, child exploitation material. The media uses the term, society uses the term, child pornography. We must stop using that term. Pornography is sexual activity, the depiction of sexual activity between consenting adults, which is downloaded and viewed by millions of people all around the world. But to put those two terminologies together, child and pornography, somehow legitimises the practice, somehow minimises its importance. We need to call this what it is. It's child exploitation material. It is the exploitation of children, and it causes trauma, it causes hardship, it causes harm. Of course, there is a lot to do in this area. We must invest in policing, we must invest in education, we must invest in child protection. But I am convinced that we are not investing enough in treating people who are sexually attracted to children. There are virtually no services for people who identify a sexual attraction to children but haven't offended yet. Of course, victims and families and society want jail as punishment, and that's fair enough. But even that, even jail, doesn't make up for the kind of trauma that abuse causes in people's lives. The current options are jail. And as I said before, jail is necessary to keep that section of this child sex abuse spectrum who cannot or will not control their behaviours away from society. That is necessary. But that alone won't work with the whole spectrum to reduce the risk of to children in future. In fact, imprisonment can increase the risk in some people. Because when you take away supportive relationships, when you take away empathy, when you take away accountability, education, employment, stable accommodation, risk goes up. And we know with people who have offended that treatment works. Not jail, not lynch mobs, and not outing them. Large-scale studies internationally have shown that evidence-based programs can reduce offending by half. And really, we're at the early days of understanding what works. Our professions can do better in future, and we will, in treating people who are sexually attracted to children. When it comes to paedophilia, David, unfortunately, is not alone. The estimates are that as many as 5% of men identify with a sexual attraction towards children. These are not strange men in coats hanging around playgrounds. They are professionals, they are tradespeople, they are family members, they are spouses, they are students. There are many reasons why somebody may find that they have a sexual attraction to children. Some people have been sexually abused themselves, but not all. Some people have stalled sexual development. And there's really challenging research surfacing internationally at the moment which would suggest that a person can just be born that way. But regardless of the reason why somebody might find that they have a sexual attraction to children, there is one immovable, undeniable fact. Children cannot consent to sexual behaviour. And therefore, every adult, regardless of where their orientation is, has a legal and moral obligation to control their sexual impulses. In Germany right now, there is a program being offered to people before they offend, for people who identify sexual attraction towards children. At this stage, as many as 430 people have successfully gone through this program, and 10 times that have inquired about joining the program. The wait lists are long. And the early outcome studies are showing really positive results. But here, can we handle seeing a website which says, do you like children in ways you shouldn't? We have to get our heads around this if we want to protect children better. Let's go back to David. He could stay where he is, if you're lucky. He could have that sexual attraction towards children and never act upon it. As I said, with the profile, in my view, it's quite likely that eventually he will progress without treatment, without intervention, to downloading child exploitation material. It's in the balance at this stage. And you as a concerned parent want to help. So what do? Well, you do some internet-based research. You find a website that says, do you like children in ways you shouldn't? This could be a program which might help your son. David reluctantly agrees. He's a bit nervous about going to this, but he agrees to go along. You find a psychologist who has empathy for David, who doesn't judge David, but will firmly challenge any ideas he has around sexual activity in children. We'll work on establishing positive relationships with his peer groups. We'll work on establishing positive relationships with a sexual partner, and a lot of other things that we do in therapy with people. It doesn't work with everybody. I'm not saying this is a cure-all, but it does work with a lot of people. And in this example, it works with David. He does really well in treatment. He has a better social life, finds a girlfriend. He understands that his sexual attraction is still there, but over time it wanes, and he has a better, healthier sexual relationship with a partner his own age. Not only is David's life improved, but we may have stopped between 1 and 100 children from having to experience the horror of sexual abuse trauma. I believe that when we don't speak openly and seek to understand, our revulsion and anger, which is natural, blocks our view on all of the possible solutions in this area. This is not about making excuses. It's not about going easy on anybody. It's firmly about protecting children. I'm convinced that early intervention can and does reduce the risk of harm to children in the future. We owe it to our children to do better. Thank you.